Hi and welcome to the final part of our sci-fi scene. In this one it's going to be pretty straightforward. We're going to bring in the frames that we rendered out of Cycles 4D and we're going to composite them in After Effects. Now you can obviously composite in whichever program you like, but I'm going to use After Effects because it's quite straightforward. And we won't have to be doing too much because the shots were already quite well look-dev'd in the actual render itself, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay, so let's just review our footage, and I'll make this a little bit larger so you can see it. And let's play. I've played the timeline back a couple of times just to test this out. You can see our goo's coming out, looking disgusting, excellent, and it comes to a settle. And then obviously the missing element is our FUI. So I'm just going to turn that layer on, and you can see that comes in. They scale up, and that's looking cool. Now I'm not going to composite those on over each other just yet. What I want to do is I want to prepare for something that we're going to need to do. We're going to need to, can you see how because I let this simulate from the very beginning and render from the very beginning frame, but I don't want it to come on until really it wipes on with these bezel sort of tips here that kind of, you see they kind of, they'll wipe it on. So from just a simple wipe from the bottom to top. But the problem with that is that this is moving. This object is moving. So we'll actually need some 3D data from After Effects for that. And I tend to use a bit of an old school method with AECs, but I've always found it the most reliable. But it'll require a touch of prep beforehand, and we're just going to jump into Cinema 4D and sort that out. Okay, so here we are in the scene that I rendered out, and it's just our scene as we know it already. I turned off some of the X-Particles things here just to keep the scene a bit snappy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake out this screen. Now, I could export it right now with an external compositing tag on, but I actually prefer to, if I click on it actually, and I can just press S or whatever your shortcut is to jump to it. And I could add a compositing tag, but I found that sometimes you have problems with hierarchies that have expression tags, and this is not always in the correct space. So we're going to bake it out. And what we need to do to bake it out is we need to constrain a null using a PSR constraint to this screen and then bake that null out. And that's what we'll apply the external compositing tag to. Okay, sounds overly complicated. It's not. It's very simple, especially once you've done it a couple of times. So let's add a null. And let's put it to the top of our object manager. And let's call this screen... I guess screen null, and then let's select that screen null, holding Control and Command down, select the screen geometry because that's the thing we want to constrain to. And if you bring up your commander, you can go for PSR constraint, and you can see there I've used it in the scene already, so it's highlighted. And you double click it, and did you see the null jumped over there? And it's now in that position. And if I try and move it, it's going to constrain, and I can't. So now I'm just going to change the type. Let's do a hex again. Let's leave it in plain. And then I'll just make the color a bit brighter. So when I'm not selecting it, I can see it. There we go. And now I could throw the external compositing tag, but then I'm relying on expression tags, and I don't find them. They don't always come in correctly in After Effects. Now, there's another problem. Can you see how that is shifting around? That is a classic Cinema 4D priorities problem. And it never gets its priorities straight. And basically, we need it to execute after all of the other tags have executed. And I know that these are all 0s and 5s and below like 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell this tag, our constraint, to execute at the very last priority. So 499 is the highest it can go. I know that I don't have any other tags that high. So now every other tag executes, and our tag PSR constraint can execute last. Okay, so cool. Now we need to bake that down to keyframes. So hit Shift F3 and your timeline will pop up. And then just if it's not showing in here, just drag it in. And then if it's not showing still, just check your view settings. It's always a view setting in here. Catches me out a few times. So just whilst this is selected in the object manager, sorry, not in the object manager, in the timeline here, go to functions in the top bar here and hit bake objects. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to bake this screen null. And all we're going to do is we're going to take the position and rotation and any animated parameters. I mean, we don't have any, but that's fine. We're baking the expression down. That's exactly what's going to happen. And we're going to create a copy so it doesn't overwrite the original. That's good. So I'm going to hit OK. And it's very quick. It's quick because the playback of the scene is quick. If the playback of the scene is slow, that baking process can take ages. So just a warning there. Great, so you can see that has now added a bunch of keyframes, and let's hide our original null. I'll call that one PSR, and I'll call this one baked. And there you go. Keyframe positions where it should be. So let's now add that compositing tag. So right click it, external compositing. I'm going to make it a solid, just so it's nice and visible when we... Actually, no, we don't need it. We can just have it as a null once it comes into After Effects. So I'm going to press save. Always save. Always a good idea. And there's one other thing I want to do is, and I don't want the lights to come through. So, well, I don't want all of the lights to come through. So I'm quite happy for... Yeah, in fact, I'm quite happy for these to come through because I might use them as reference points for like a flare or something like that. So I might add... these three. So if you go to the general tab, just make sure that export to compositing is on. And then this hood key one, I'm going to turn off. And then I'm going to select these and turn those off as well. I don't want to overload my After Effects with stuff I don't really care or need about. The same with the cameras. So I don't want the editor to cam to come through. I do want my main shot camera to come through. And that's that. And now all we need to do is we go into... Actually, just before we do that, and before I forget, I always like to check the orientation of the 3D objects I'm exporting. And this one, yeah, actually, that one is Z up. And I like to have it... If you look in the bottom left corner here, there's a sort of orientation of the world axis directions. And you see, obviously, Y is up, Z away from camera, and then X left to right. But the null we have is actually Z up, and then Y is going negative Z. So I want to basically not use that null, or not use that orientation. So what I'm going to do the simplest thing, and that is to add a null, and as a child of that object, reset its PSR and rotate it 90 degrees, and then put the tag on that. So if I hold shift down, makes it a child of the object you have selected, and I'm going to reset the PSR. That zeroes it out. And now let's just call that one screen null. We've come full circle. And let's put the comp tag on that one. And that's all set up fine. Now the orientation is off. So I'm just going to go into my rotation, gimbal, and then hold shift whilst I do this. And then I just put it 90 degrees up. And now that axis is now matching that one. That just means that when you're in After Effects, it makes it much easier to replace content because it's oriented the correct way. So Y up is the way it should be exported out of C4D, and then when it comes into After Effects, it'll match that orientation. Okay, so let's go into the render settings now, which is the last thing we're going to do. In your render settings, check that you've got the correct frame range you want, and then go to Save. And then at the bottom here, you've got this compositing project file. And here you can see, now you need to have some, at least something saving to do this. And it'll, in fact, what this does is it will actually create a compositing file. So it'll actually try and be helpful by layering up post effects and stuff. We don't want it to do that, but that's just stuff we can delete and ignore. What we really want is to include the 3D data. So that's our screen null, our cameras, and those few lights. So let's do that now. Let's save project file. And I have a place I like to save mine. You can save them wherever you like. It just brings them in. I've already got one in there actually from an earlier test. So all you do is you just give it a name, you hit save, and then it'll, similarly to that baking operation, as long as it plays fast along the timeline, it won't take long at all. If it is a long playthrough, that can take a while. So it's always good to just optimize your scene for that particular process. Okay, so let's go back to After Effects. And here we are again. Now let's import that AEC. I'm already in that folder. That's great. And you can see it added a few extra things here. So these things we don't need to care about. Those missing footage, because that footage is not what we rendered out. And you can see it's all named after the main comp. In fact, I don't need to delete that just yet. Let's jump into this main comp here. And you can see we've got the camera, those 3 lights, and our screen null. And our screen null looks as though it's facing the right way. We'll see when we add it to the master comp. So I'm just going to copy those, Control C, Command C, and Control V them into here. And I can see pretty much already that that is lining up nicely. So if I hit play, oops, actually better to scrub. I've got them soloed. There we go. And you can see it's nicely lined up, and it should be Y up. Excellent. Okay, so that's a good sign, and that means that we can get on with the rest of the what we actually wanted to use that for. And I want to use it to create a couple of things. I want it to create like a darkening background so that it lets the FUI pop, and obviously I want the FUI itself to actually be masked by this 3D null, or sorry, this 3D matte, I should say. And so that means that I can kind of start animating it on before it's landed, but also means that we won't get... So if I actually screen that over, if I do a screen operation, you'll start to see what this is going to look like. You can see it's obviously, I only want it to display through this frame, as if this frame has some kind of screen AR system. And you can see that's pretty much where I want it to wipe on. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a pre-comp for this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a black solid. Nice and straightforward. In fact, actually, no, let's not create a black solid. Let's pre-comp our FUI. And I'm actually going to, let's just do that. Hold Control-Shift-C and you can create a pre-comp. And we'll call this one FUI. Oop. Wow, typos galore. So FUI pre-comp, jump into that. Now, that's not got what we want in it. Actually, to jump back into that, jump back into the main comp. And I want to take these 3D items through. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because I want to be able to have the camera in 3D space. Now, if you were just trying to place something in this screen, say it was a 2D texture, you would just replace this null with an image. But we're not doing that. We're using this as a source for our mask. So yep, let's copy these 2 things, these 2 items, jump into the FUI part, paste them in here, and you can see that's all lined up nicely. Excellent. And now we're going to replace this null with a mask, essentially, so like a solid. And it already is a solid, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a black solid. Just whilst I'm in this panel here, hit Control Y, black solid, and we'll call this FUI matte. It's actually going to be essentially a little bit of a placeholder for a second. So I've actually created that solid, but I want to quickly transfer it to the null, and I find the easiest way is actually get rid of it from the comp. Select the null or the 3D item you want to replace, hold Alt, and then drag your asset onto there. And then it's scaled up usually way too high. So if I do 5%, you can see there we go, it's in the frame, but it's also transparent. So it's got 100% opacity. So let's just increase that to 100. And then we can actually just eyeball fit it to the frame. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring on our beauty comp just as a template for a second. You see, I probably should have stayed in that comp to do all this first and then pre-comp it after, but it's fine. Just a bit like that. We're going to feather this, so it's not going to be as sharp as that. And let's, I want to shift it up. So I could, if I grab it by this, obviously we're going to get a weird keyframe thing. So if I move, you see it'll jump on that frame. You can just use the anchor. So if you change the anchor point, all the animated keyframes are obviously still relative. They stay in their position and then the anchor point or the pivot moves away. Okay, so that's cool. And now we can test something out. So let's let's get rid of our beauty for a second, and let's show or use this FUI matte, the black matte here, and just go for a alpha matte. There we go. Now if I jump back into the main comp now, you'll see I can see it over here. That's because obviously the matte is now following the camera, but there's nothing over here that shouldn't be on before this arrives. Can you see that? But as you can see, it's still not quite right because it's got the screen showing already, and I don't want that to come on until around about here, around about the 50th frame-ish. So next up we need to create a wipe, and I'm just going to keep that super simple. Let's jump into here. Let's pre-comp this one. Let's pre-comp this matte. So if I Control-Shift-C, I'm going to call this FUI wipe. And you can see it's kept it in 3D, and it's kept it at the resolution that we added the object as. And here we are, we've got our solid, and we're going to keep this very simple. Select our solid layer, and we're going to just add a rectangle mask. So if with that selected, just double click and it'll create a mask the size of the comp. And let's zoom out a bit. If we just grab these bottom handles here, we can just move that down because I'm going to be animating up and I'm going to have some feathering. I just want to have enough that I can animate beyond the frames. I could also just double click the mask, get the transform up, and then if I hold control and grab the handles here, I can just drag it out and it scales from the center. Cool. So hit G to bring the feather tool up. It's going to be a fairly short feather, like so. And now we're going to add some keyframes. So let's bring up the mask path parameter down here, and let's activate a keyframe on that. And then I want it to start here. I've worked out the timings of when it needs to coordinate with the main comp. And then it just finishes sort of a second or so later, less than a second. And let's add that keyframe here. And we're going to move the whole mask up. So the last keyframe is just as the feather is completely up there. And then the first keyframe is when it's just off the bottom of the frame, very slightly, like so. And then that'll just animate up like so. Okay, so that's it's very simple wipe that we've created there. Let's jump back into the previous comp. You can use the mini flowchart, just tab and then into the pre-comp. And you'll see we now wipe on our graphics. Let's jump back into the master comp. And you'll see that one of the reasons I've done it all in this pre-comping method, and that is working quite nicely. I think it's a bit too fast. Yeah, way too fast, but yeah, so you can see it's on before those are above it, so we need to delay it a touch. So jump back in. Oops, wrong one. There we go. And delay it arriving a touch longer. There we go. Nice. Just in time to catch it analyzing everything. And okay, last thing, let's grab that sort of darkening pass. I'm going to do some bloom and stuff in a minute, and that's the main reason I pre-comp that. It's because now I can just duplicate this comp a few times, give it some blurs, add over and make it look cool. Okay, so let's do that darkening pass. So what we can do is we've got the screen null still, so I'm going to duplicate that, so we've got a spare one. And we can just use the FUI matte again, you see. So I'm just going to Alt drag that over. Remember to check the opacity, scale it right down, and then I'm just going to kind of position it roughly in place. Press A for anchor, get rid of that keyframe or track, and then put that there. And now I'm going to use a mask, so to just feather the edges and soften it a bit. So if you double click with a rectangle mask, you'll get the mask and it'll fill the exact dimensions of the object or the frame. And we're just going to go to feather, so mask feather. And we'll feather it in a bit. I might use mask expansion as well, so let's just pull that back in there. This is just this is going to be very subtle, and I'm going to place it under the FUI pre-comp. And you can see, obviously, that makes it very clear, but, oh, actually, like, can you see the mask is actually feathering outside its bounds? So let's definitely tweak that expansion enough so that it's, well, it's going to have to be 70, isn't it? Let's make that 50. Might be too much. I might go subtle on it, so let's go 30 and minus 30. There we go. So let's give it some opacity, drop that right down. Like 10%, maybe 20. 25. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the mask to wipe that on as well. So the matte, I'm going to actually borrow the alpha off that. So if I solo that layer, obviously it has that alpha already built in, so might as well use it. Oh, wrong one. Oh, no, it's not the wrong one. It's just hidden it, that's all. It's fine. So there we go. Can you see it wipes up on with the screen? And that's probably even too strong now. I just want it to be a little bit of an enhancement. So let's go 15%. There we go. Real subtle. But you can see without it, the brightness of that goo actually kind of kills our lights. I mean, we're going to boost these now. So let's do that. Let's do the blooms. So this is our pre-comp. That's our beauty. And I'm just going to Control D, duplicate it. Now I'm screening on this one. Maybe we could add, but let's do a fast blur. This is just my very quick and dirty method of creating blooms. There are obviously some excellent plugins that can do this if you want. So I like to do like a one kind of tight bloom. And then, so I'm going to call that one tight bloom. And then I'm going to duplicate that one and call that wide bloom. And let's make that much bigger, like much softer, like hazing on the lens. And then obviously we want to drop both of those down, right down. Maybe let's try add. Yeah, see, add is a more realistic idea of what that would be doing, but I think it's blowing it out too much. So I'm going to go back to screen. There we go. So I like it to be fairly subtle. And then eventually when I might even pre-comp this another level and make this the beauty and then bloom the whole thing. But I'm quite like how that's, yeah, I think it definitely needs bloom down here. So one other thing I haven't really talked about actually is the fact that the reflections that we talked about in the other part, how we're applying those. So if you look, can you see in the surface here, there's actually these reflections. And I could have, you know, I haven't actually used any of the separate passes. So if I say wanted to boost the reflection, I could go into this one. So if I grab the, where is it? Glossy. Gloss color, glossy direct, there we go. And I put that here, you can see we could actually enhance that. So if I jump to the main comp actually, throw it in there, and then I do an add operation, you can see we actually get a boost to the reflections, and that might be quite nice. So yeah, I quite like that. So that's going to have to be alpha'd out as well as the other ones have been. Oh, no, I don't think that's a problem. There we go. Nice. Okay, this is coming together nicely. I think any sci-fi scene has to have a lens flare, so I think that might be the final addition, and then we'll render it out. So I like to use optical flares, and it's excellent. And because we have lights in the scene already, we've got some kind of reference points to actually have them operate from. So let's add optical flares. Oh, first of all, let's add a layer for this. So I like to add a black solid, call it flares. Let's put it down a few levels. There we go. And I tend to make it an add layer. We'll see how much that blows it out, but it should be fine. Drag the optical flares effect on. And source type is going to track lights. And that's actually already tracking lights. I don't know if you can see that. It's quite subtle. But if I solo the layer, we'll see it nicely. Do you know what? I quite like the multiple mixing lights there. That's quite nice. I'm going to try one different type of light. So let's go to options. Not one type of flare, I should say. I like the... actually, I could say natural flares. I do quite like the you know, the sci-fi ones. So let's try one of these. Might be a bit too harsh. That one's taking the warm color from the light, so you know, I quite like the reflexes. I think it's a bit too much though. So let's hide some of these. I think the overhead fill is not doing much. There we go. So left warm is definitely giving us a nice catch. And I'd say we don't really want that to be that color. So I'm just going to override it in the effect. So if I go to the flares effect, optical flares, and then I can say do not use the light color. So you can see here there's use light color, uncheck that, and you can see it becomes much cooler. Let's scale it down a bit. And I'll tell you what, let's go into a 2 view. It's going to have to be a 4 view. And let's bring that down a bit. And you can see on my viewport over there, we're getting this nice reflex coming all the way across the screen. I don't want it to be too... I actually might want it to be out of the frame by then. So let's... oh, it's moving. Let's kill the keyframes on there, make sure it doesn't do that. What if I just start with a bit of a reflex at the very beginning? Because I don't want it to dominate the scene. Yeah, that's nice. Although, it's not really moving off screen, so... Maybe I need to come closer to the camera. This will just be all about trial and error. Just place it in you know, a decent spot, and then if it doesn't look right, change it. Oh, there we go. I think I might have found a... Yeah, I like that. And I might change where the center of the flare, or where it thinks the screen is, or the lens is technically, just to fake it a bit, to move it off screen. Oh, let's go back to our 1 view. If I just bring it so the reflexes are kind of there, and then I don't want them on at the end here, because that's kind of... Yeah, that's just adding a nice little subtle effect. And then at the beginning it's a bit more dramatic. I want to soften that a bit. Do you know what? I might do the cheap thing again and go for a fast box blur. It's all GPU accelerated, of course. And then I might drop the brightness a touch. I just want it to be quite a subtle thing to begin with, and then not really interfere with the scene much at all later on. Yeah, I think that's getting somewhere. Cool. It's definitely adding an extra wash over the scene, so we might want to do a final correction. But yeah, that's looking pretty good. In fact, with the washing out, I think we could definitely darken the backing layer for the FUI to pop out a little bit more. So obviously that's super easy to do. We can just jump to our FUI matte layer and just increase its darkness value. Maybe let's try 40 to start with. That's probably a little bit too far. Should play back pretty fast because that was just a simple opacity change. Yeah, and that's pretty much, that's showing nicely, the background coming up nicely. It is perhaps a little bit too visible, so I might bring the opacity up on it a bit more. Maybe we animate it up. Yeah, let's do that. So it's not quite as weird when it's building up here. Or actually, we could just knock it back a bit more. Let's knock it back to 30%. And let's animate it up. So let's add a keyframe here. I still want to see the wipe, so drop that to 0% here. Okay, a bit more subtle. And then that just means everything behind it jumps out a bit more. So if I jump to like 100%, you'll see, obviously, we see only the FUI stuff. Okay, so that's very close to being complete. In fact, I think we can call that good. Just to add a few notes, we could add some animated text onto this actual surface as well. Because we have the cameras set up now, we can add all that stuff in. So if we jumped into our FUI pre-comp, which has the camera in it, and we can scrub around and see the... Yeah, and if I click on that, you can see that's the coordinates. Now, because we know this is at the right ratio and everything, I think the best way to add anything to this, any graphics to this, would be to bring in this graphic and then replace this, or duplicate and replace this without the matte behavior on it. So I actually have that graphic in the scene in the project. So if I duplicate this FUI wipe here, jump into my renders, I've actually got it here. So what I could do is pre-comp this, so I could just drop that into a comp here. It could be called Sci-Fi Graphics. Let's pull it out of that there. We should probably create a pre-comps folder, just to be tidy. Pre-comps, there we go. Then we're in this now. And you can see, obviously, this looks quite different because when it's rendered, it sort of bleached out a bit to the white so that it would allow it to glow, but we're just going to use this as a template. If I jump back to that FUI pre-comp, and the layer I've just duplicated, I show it, I can just replace it with this graphic here. Now the problem you'll probably have figured out already is that this has depth of field in it, and the scaling is slightly different. So I don't think we need to worry too much about the scaling. I can scale it down separately from the other stuff, just as long as I've got a nice layout for my type here. So I'm just going to add some type. I should have matched the fonts here. That's Proxima Nova, but use whatever you like. And we can just add something, I don't know, analysis in progress. So analysis in progress. That's a bit large for what we're looking at over here. I could, if I hit Control R or Command R, I could bring on some rulers just to line things up a bit nicer. It doesn't have to be too connected to these here. I might make it a bit a thinner version of that. Yeah, something like that. There we go. And obviously we'll have to match the color because the color was baked into the render. So if I jump back to effects, I could actually just use one of the default text type sort of behaviors. If I jump to text here, animate in, I mean, really, I just want it to kind of type on, or it could blink on, I guess. In fact, let's do typewriter. That's a classic. Yeah, just kind of have it come on like that, and let's have that come on way quicker as well. It's a bit too slow. There we go. This is just to indicate that we can use that camera now that we've got it in there to position some type and make it look a bit more interesting. There we go, some type coming on. Let's jump back out of this pre-comp and just see it in place. And you can see, there we go. Now I'm going to hide this layer for a second. I'm just going to see where the focus is. So obviously this goes out of focus pretty quickly. We do shift focus to this point where we actually see it. So we'll have to animate some blurring, but that's fine. Nice and easy to do. So I say we have it come on basically here. Oh, pretty much is already. That's good. There we go. Jump back out. Let's unhide it. Oh, and let's hide the rest of the UI for now. Actually, no, let's use it as a guide. So if I make that slightly transparent, you can see the scale that we're dealing with here. And I can literally just hold shift down just to keep the ratio correct. And then I can kind of scale it down until it's in position. And then I think I'm going to need to move the anchor point slightly. Just shift it like so. Remember, this is just a template for this one bit of type here, but obviously we could add logos, we could add other animation stuff in post. So let's hide our guide layer. Analysis in progress. There we go. I think we probably have to go for a thicker font actually, because it's going to get killed by the blur I add to it. Go to character, regular, jump back out. Yeah, there we go. And then let's grab a fast blur, keep it really simple. Fast blur. Don't want to be too aggressive, of course. Want it to match this down here, so maybe drop the iterations down a bit. Make it about 3 units or 3 pixel blur. And we'll definitely have to keyframe that. So let's add a keyframe there. Let's do filter that to blur down here, blur radius. And then our moment of where it comes into focus is here. So really that should be keyframe there. Drop that down. Comes in a touch too early, I think. Perhaps just a few frames later. There we go. Yeah. And we could change the color of it. I'm going to use tinting because that's just easy to be able to correct once you've... means I just don't have to keep jumping inside the layer and back out again. Okay, oh, we could make it the blue actually, could we? Yeah, maybe the blue. No, I'm going to go red for drama. And obviously it's kind of a little bit knocked back. I mean, the effects on the upper layers, so if we jump up to the master comp, should help a little bit, but you can see that's not too bad actually. It kind of stands out off the background, so let's just see what that looks like. Cool. There we go. And you could render effects in Cinema 4D in a 2D kind of sort of way, and like we've kind of done the XP edges here and stuff, and we could do this all in post. We could do all the aligning in post and stuff, but that kind of reduces the ability to kind of look dev as much in Cinema. It's just personal preference and whatever workflow works really. Okay, well I'm really happy with that, and I think it's about time that we rendered it, and we could add some sounds and that kind of thing. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the Sci-Fi project, and I'll see you in the next one.